I've just told Morris how to destroy his laptop. Anyway, welcome to episode 20 of the CodeZone. 20 episodes. Wow, that's genuinely quite epic. Morris in with the first there as well. Yeah, you probably can use a 19.5 volt in lieu of a 20 volt charger for a laptop. The worst thing that's going to happen is something's not going to switch on. We've got some people in the chat, so there's a debate about who was first as usual. So we've got Magetsup, Christoph is here, Null Alternative is here, Alta is here, Apostolisk is here, Dragoneye is here. Oh, and I'm getting a little flag saying unstable streaming. So we'll just give that a second, see if that settles down. Looks like it's settled down a bit at my end, but Twitch is saying it's unstable. Anyway, let me know if there's a problem. I don't think there's going to be a problem. And what are we doing? Well, apologies for the delay, first of all. As you may or may not know, I've just released a video, so that's taken up nearly all of my day. Proper one lone coder day today. It's been good. It's been like it used to be. So get up early, make a video, have an idea, get it all edited and released. It's a nice one too. It's quite a personal one. Danny Cron is here. Hello. Yes, we've got lines connecting stuff. That's right. Yes, morning, Dandestein. Mega Rev is here. Good. I don't think we'll see too many people tonight because it was a bit of an unplanned stream. I did say I was going to do one on Sunday, but I never said when. Now, yes, some of you have noticed already we have lines connecting stuff and there is letters. So it looks like loads of progress has been made, but actually it really hasn't. On Saturday afternoon, I had a couple of hours doing what I'm calling a quiet stream on the Discord, where basically we put some good tunes on and just listened to the music whilst people were streaming code. In fact, it was just me streaming code, but the idea was to try and get other people streaming code as well, but just with the music on, nobody talking on top. It was an idea, it didn't take off. We'll try again maybe next weekend. Although I might be quite busy next weekend. Yes, Mega video and CodeZone today. We're having a full-on one lone coder day. Well, yes, I've got some lines, and really I'm getting to the point where I'm running out of assets that I've got. We're going to have to start drawing things. The idea of the lines was, well, to start sort of describing what the solar system looks like. Now, in the last episode, we did sort of artificially generate the solar system. We created planets, we created moons, and I thought it'd be fun to sort of visualize where they were put. One, we can see, do they start to collide with each other? And we can see, yes, they do. So we've got some of our numbers still yet to work out. But it was quite interesting to sort of see the little clusters that pop up. It's starting to look somewhat plausible. But as we zoomed out, you couldn't see anything. So the planets and the satellites and everything were too small to see, which is what we'd expect. We're rendering everything at a real scale. But I think it is quite important we have a view like this. So I hacked together something to just quickly display a screen space scale invariant letter. And we'll just have a quick look at that later. Because we can see there's a satellite whizzing around there. It's displayed by an S, and the moon, the Dandestein provided the graphic for the moon has the letter M, and planets have the letter P. I'd like to replace those with, well, pixely icons, to be honest. And I had a go at drawing them. In fact, that's how the stream started, but I'm not an artist, so it was difficult for me. Maybe the community can help me out, and we can evolve from these basic letters. I've also slowed down the speed of the universe. It is live, it is moving around, as we can see, but this is probably more likely the speed that things are going to happen at. The satellites are probably still spinning too fast. Now, yes, I've got these lines sort of connecting things. This was really just an experiment in visualization. There's nothing functional going on here, other than I gave the ability to select a satellite. Oh, I also got rid of the wobbly camera as well. That was something else that we fixed. Once you've selected a satellite, you can currently press the R key. Now, it goes into selection mode. There's currently all sorts of things bad with the state machine, and we may have a go at fixing those tonight. And then we can select something else that we can journey to. So I'm going to select this one. Now that has actually drawn a route. The trouble is we can't see it because the state machine's bad, but when I click to idle mode again, we can start to see all of the routes that are plotted. So it's just it was a hacked way to see, because I wanted to see, do the lines look cool as things are moving around. And the intention is that these are going to kind of be the trading routes or the logistics routes required. And I wanted to just see how much movement was going on. And I think I quite like it, because in the short term, the movement it's there, but it's not very massive. But in the long term, as the planets do actually start to rotate around the sun, the amount of movement is going to be huge, and that's going to really influence how you build your empire, as it were, in space. Right, have a quick look at the chats here. Rob Watling, good evening. RHK, hello. Shotgun seat, I spoil you. Just trying to get everything done today. 13 digits, just done watching the video. It's an interesting one, that one, wasn't it? The letters should probably be disabled when zoomed out too much. Well, if you zoom out too much, then you can't see anything other than the star. I think quite the opposite. I think the letters should be disabled when you zoom in. But even then, I'm not too fussed, because if this becomes a nice little icon, I don't mind that being sort of in the middle of the planet. Yeah, there's all the sorts of these... Start that again. There's all these sorts of decisions that we need to make. Anyway, I just wanted to see what do the lines start to look like. Are the lines a circle on a quad? No, the lines are a line decal, so that's quite easy to do. Ooh, that's very loud at my end. Let me just turn down the volumes. Of course, I don't mind the notifications, but they're very, very loud. The circles are actually drawn on the sprite layer. It's just all of the decals that are in the way, except I've got nothing I can put in front of them. Using additive blending, so of course it will add then to whatever's in the sprite layer. So that's a way of making the sprites shine through the decals. In fact, the decal ever so subtly tints the sprite, and I think it's quite a nice effect. Procedurally generated planet and moon names. Yes, I think that's probably what we'll end up needing as well. Is the aliasing of the orbits on your end too, or is it because of the stream? Aliasing of the orbits. The orbits look pretty smooth. These circles are... they're not as smooth, because they're sort of drawn in integer space rather than the floating point space. But certainly the objects are quite smooth. We need to replace the circles anyway, because when we do a really big zoom in, we've gone back to the problem we had in sort of episode 2 or 3, that it's drawing these massive circles. There's no clipping being done, and you can see we've really tanked in terms of frame rate here. We've dropped down to 39 frames per second. And if we zoom out, it can quite happily draw all of these circles, but now it's got fewer pixels to plot. In pixel space, we're up to 650. So I might change the nature of how these circles are drawn. I think it's either begging for a circle decal implementation, but that's always going to be a grotesque hack. I don't like approximating a circle with a polygon. And just saying, that's good enough. It'll never be good enough. I think the solution is a slightly more intelligent circle drawing routine. I have started to experiment with clipping those against rectangles. Or we do what we've done for the satellite placement tool. We draw the orbits simply as a decal, like that, because that costs nothing to do. And we can also choose to sort of fade in and out orbits. So there's no point in drawing this sort of micro orbits at this scale. No point at all. So maybe we need something that's scale dependent to determine what they should be drawn as. If we could draw it in decal space, then it'll look quite nice. We can also play some fun and games with the pixel shading effects too. Anyway, just put a satellite there. Eight bits, hello. Adonai, hello. Have you seen Unreal Engine 5's new nanite technology? Well, yeah, they borrowed it from Pixel Game Engine. The royalties are amazing. So tonight, I wanted to kind of think about genuine gameplay points to talk about. Maybe not too much coding. We'll probably tidy up this state machine for placing the routes, because I think it's time to start thinking about the commodities and what we're going to be moving around and how we're going to be moving them around, that sort of thing. Alex, hello. Phil, my apologies, Phil. I know that you tried to tune in on Friday and were disappointed. So sorry about that. Yeah, a quick last-minute change of plans. You heard something taken about something taken from Pixel Gaming. Yeah, it was this nanite technology. Right. Okay. Just getting a notification that the new video is doing all right. Good. Good. And tonight we are drinking regular, normal Vimto. Now, I know a lot of you are sort of following along, you're sort of the regulars. If you ever do miss a video, the VODs are on the Twitch channel, even though the Twitch channel looks awful. But I also more accurately maintain everything on the Javid X9 Extra YouTube channel. So if you have missed an episode, don't worry about it, it will be up there somewhere. So I thought, how much fun would it be, and this is a debatable question, to consider just creating a big spreadsheet today? Yeah, probably just dazzled a lot of you too. Well, that's your own fault if you're too used to dark mode for everything. But I do want to start considering things like the commodities in the game and how we're going to start moving them around, because we're kind of at that stage. We can now place. I'll tell you what. I'll put these satellites back on whilst I talk. We can place the satellites now. We can construct them out of modules. We've now got the ability to sort of connect a couple of satellites together, a couple of space stations together. So it might be time to start thinking about what they do. Put on your sunglasses, yes. Yeah, I do try to maintain the Javid X9 Extra ones, I think, more so than the VODs on Twitch, because the VODs on Twitch don't last forever. You can only keep a video up there for so long. And then you've got to sort of earn the right to keep more videos and things up there. It's all very competitive. I don't know why they've tried to gamify the Twitch platform quite as much as they have done. I don't see why that was necessary. But I want to consider things like this. So I know that for a space station, so let's select a space station. We know that we're going to see the frame rate is absolutely tanked because I've zoomed in. So I'll probably have to turn off those circle drawings whilst we're doing this. But once we're in space station edit mode, we can place these modules. We've talked about what do the modules actually mean. And at the moment, we've got no sort of GUI to choose from, but we can certainly start to build a bit of a space station up. And space stations are going to have certain basic criteria. The first is going to be power. Now, power will come from things like solar panels, but not necessarily only solar panels. Now, it could be starting with solar panels, then medium-sized solar panels, then large solar panels, then some sort of radioactive source or some sort of other source. I don't know. All these sort of things that we need to start thinking about. So I can envisage that if a situation where if you place a solar panel like this, that will generate so many units of power commodity per gameplay minute or something like that. Naturally, of course, everything on the space station also consumes so many commodity units per minute as well. But we've got this interesting added dynamic that the amount of power that those are generating per minute is also related to the proximity to the light source in the solar system, which I think is quite interesting. This is in release mode, yeah, but because you turned up late, Alex, and you're like one of those guys that turns up late to class and then suddenly go, well, I don't know why it's like that. We did explain what was going on with the frame rate. So, turn up on time next time, Alex. Do you know what? Even Alex was giving me a hard time this afternoon about not starting the stream on time as well. Outrageous. So the idea is we need to come up with a set of commodities. So power is the obvious one. Now, whether that's what that means, so maybe it could be something like solar units is a commodity which get converted by solar panels into power units. Because I quite like the idea of having a battery module that stores power. So when you're going further away from the sun, you start drawing on your batteries instead. So that how these modules all interact, I don't know. Other things that we may have to worry about, if we've got life forms living in the space station, then we want oxygen, for example. So where do we get oxygen from? Is it something we can create? But living things will also create carbon dioxide. Living things also consume power. Modules and things doing things also produce heat. Now, heat was an interesting one, I thought, because on the whole, we just let heat sort of radiate out into space. But what if it was a commodity? What if you needed to get it to a space station that was far away from the solar system center point? That might actually require heat. So could heat be one of these commodities that we ship from space stations near the sun, or really active space stations with all sorts of heat generating equipment attached to them, and ship that to the other side of the solar system? This has probably been asked to death. Have you ruled out elliptical orbits? No, I've not ruled them out. The difference becomes it's got to be artificial, because what I'm not implementing is an n-body simulation. I have no interest at all in implementing that and making it then sustainable. And it has to be contrived, because if we just left it to physics, after a while, the space stations, they're going to be orbiting in completely useless ways. Right? So what we want is something that's constrained enough that we can work with it and we can develop it, but at the same time realistic enough that the player is slightly more immersed in the simulation. Elliptical, I think, it's fine if we can hack it, and we can certainly hack an elliptical orbit. It doesn't have to be circular. But yeah, I don't want to go down the n-body route. Now, yes, that was another thing. So Christoph asks a really good question there. Although it would be nice to be able to move a space station into a new orbit, I've not discounted that. I did actually think, right now, I'm going to get these terms the wrong way around, but all of our space stations, they're currently spinning around the planets, or the moons. Now, one of the things that could happen is if you had a fuel source for your space station, you could move the space station to be, is it geostationary, or what's the other one? Not the one where it stays in its position in space, but that requires energy to do so. But there's an advantage to having satellite systems that don't move around in space if they are critical to your logistics chain across the solar system. So I can envisage that you have some sort of heart line that you are somehow connecting really important things together where you don't want any sort of temporal variability. Or with enough power thrust to be able to move the planets around. I mean, I think everybody that follows One Lone Coder, or at least I would argue most people that follow One Lone Coder at some point have implemented an n-body simulation. It's just one of those nice little 2D things that you hack together. It's very simple to do, and it's quite fun to play with. It's just very computationally intensive. I mean, even at this level, let's be honest, right? Even if I had 10 times as many planets and moons here, if we did it as an n-body simulation, it's not even going to cause the processor to break a sweat. Right? The processor is currently struggling to draw large circles, but it will quite happily handle the n-body simulation at this scale. It's just that we can't do anything with it. It's very difficult to constrain it in such a way that it's guaranteed to be playable. And I think that's quite important. We don't want the game to suddenly... The guy puts, or let's say the player puts 100 hours of effort into developing this complex logistical solar system just for it to sort of all start breaking and drifting away and falling apart because the n-body simulation has started to fail on us. Is there going to be a population where each person could have a job? Well, yes, I think we definitely want the idea of workforce. I quite like that from the Anno games. That works very well. The early Anno games treated population just as this number that exists, and you had to provide enough housing for them. The latest Anno game, and I don't know about the Anno ones in space, but certainly Anno 1800 has this concept of workforce, which it uses to constrain how quickly you can develop your solar system, or well, in the case of Anno, your city. Because you've got to have sufficient workforce in order to sort of have certain features in your city. And I think it's a very wonderful mechanic, because in order to expand that workforce, you've also got to expand everything that's underneath it. Because it's hierarchical in that respect. Anno 1602 is best Anno. I got to say, Annika, I agree with you. I think it is the best Anno. It was really... I spent thousands of hours playing that game. I even took that game with me when I was staying in the States for a short time, and just sat in a hotel in Manhattan just playing it for hour after hour. I could have gone out and seen the sights, but I was playing Anno 1602 instead. It was brilliant. Have workers as a resource that you need to manage, maybe giving them different skills. I think we need to sort of start to simplify a little bit. So I was going to have the idea of workforce, but there's really only maybe 4 or 5 types of workforce, because it could end up everything becoming so fiddly. What I really want to avoid is this becoming such a fiddly simulation that we can't test anything. Every single tiny feature requires 4 days of playing in order to start seeing an effect. And when we get stuck into the mathematics of the production chain and all that, that's going to take a lot of tweaking and a lot of time just fiddling about with values. We may even have to start thinking about a sensible way to implement that testing, because it would be useful to perhaps log the trends of things. But if we're changing the parameters of functions, then because those functions largely rely on stuff that's happened before, do we then have to take the game from a known snapshot, then let it simulate for a couple of hours, and then see what the result of the function was? But see, that doesn't suit us as sort of these live, fast turnaround programmers. We want to just change a function, immediately see its effects. That's just going to be catastrophic to the game, because you'd end up saturating certain parts, which would then unbalance all of the other mathematics. Very difficult to tune, and I wonder how they do it in games like Anno. I bet you it's just manpower and time. Since my brain seems to be oozing out of my ears right now, I want to write an article on a topic I had difficulty understanding, which I think would be helpful to others, but perhaps I should continue tomorrow. Oh, so that's Alter. Alter, are you chatting in the right chat? You probably want a way to change all the parameters with the game without rebuilding all the time. Yeah, and that's going to happen. I'm going to offload everything to Lua. We've not really got into that phase of things yet. Just want to make sure we can render, and we've got a user interface that kind of works. Just getting these basics down first. Oh, I'm in Space Station Edit. I was wondering why the camera was behaving strangely. If we come out of Space Station Edit mode, there we go. Select that planet. That's okay, Alter. You see, Magetsu says, "Oh, goodbye performance, snuff, snuff." I don't think it will, because we're not going to be every frame updating everything. In fact, the actual simulation side of it is, even though there'll be lots of stuff going on, it's very, very small. And I've not yet sort of decided on how the simulation is going to be structured. We've got this nice ECS system, but that doesn't necessarily suit all parts of the simulation. I need to do some experiments, and so we'll probably look at that over the next few weeks too. Serialization next week. I think, Dandasi, you're not far off. We need to get to a point where we can start sort of saving the world and the universe. And it's, as all of the experienced programmers in the chat will know, doing these things is easier from day zero rather than trying to squeeze it in later on. And we've not really sort of looked at how we save the world state at the moment. But I think before we get too involved in any of that, so we're kind of building a bit of a roadmap for where we're going. I do want to start getting the graphical user interface up and running, because I think we need that not only for developing the game and letting the player play it, but I think we'll also build lots of debugging tools in the game environment as well. I can see that being quite useful. But one of the things I did have a look for, I have asset packs for various games, but I did actually struggle for assets for space games. So I'm just going to pull this folder over just a second. Let me find it. It is that one. Is it that one? Yeah, that one. So on Humble Bundle, periodically there are asset packs, and I tend to just sort of consume them all. Usually Gorbit shouts out when there's a good one that comes up, and then they're very cheap, but the quality is quite good. But they don't ever tend to be perfect. So, for example, for gems, I've got hundreds and hundreds of things that look like gems, and they're not crap images, right? These are good quality assets which I could use for all sorts of things. The downside is there's not that many for just regular stuff. Everything is always slightly based around sort of Dungeons and Dragons-y type things. Even if you go to like the sci-fi icon stuff, I had a quick look through this. These are a bit... I don't want to go into open up Photoshop and things like that right now. Skills, so the skill tree. Now, I think this was not that useful to look at. Yes, rather frustratingly, these skills are white on a transparent background. But it came up with... so I want to try and find something else. Something that's useful for what we need. They're all a bit... It's like trading icons. It's a trading game. What have we got that's trading? Trading with transparency. But everything's a bit sort of... Well, hey nonny nonny, right? None of it's space related, which is a bit of a shame. And I've got loads and loads of these sort of things, and I've got nothing which is sort of space based. Engineering craft icons, transparent. Yeah, engineering, but steampunk engineering. Nothing futuristic. They all have this very similar art style. I'm guessing this is some company that literally just was creating a game and went bust. Wondering when you're going to start adding some UI elements. Yeah, we're going to need them soon. White on transparent is pretty useful to colour them. It is, and we actually do exactly that for quite a few of the things that we've got going on in here. We take white decals, white sprites, and we're tinting them, shading them as necessary to give us the look and feel that we want. NanoX says steampunk spaceships. At this rate, it may have to go down that route because I've got the assets for it, but I've not really got any sort of space game assets at all. And the problem is, we're going to have lots of different commodities, and it would be nice that they could be represented with icons of some description. I'm wondering if it's worth sort of establishing an art style or a standard for an art style at first, which is simple to maintain. So it really is all flat shaded, single colour stuff. That way it's easy for people to draw rather than relying on multicoloured different artifacts like this. I'd really like to avoid steampunk in space. I've got lots of these packs. This is Humble Bundle icons. If I go to Humble Bundle card game, so card game, you think, okay, maybe there's stuff in this, but again, they're all sort of the same style. Strategy game icons. Yeah, maybe we should. I did make a comment on the Discord that instead of space thing, perhaps if I'd chosen to do dungeon thing, it would have been a bit easier. Time to install Blender and model my own ships. Well, I'm going to try. As far as I'm concerned, I'm quite happy with lines and letters. That's all you need in order to get the simulation underway. Well, let's have a quick look at just a couple of the changes I made to the code to make this happen. Because one of the things you'll notice is that the letters remain scale invariant depending on the zoom level. And that's quite an interesting feature of the transform view that we use. Where do I actually draw things? So nothing fundamentally changed in the setup. I did add another state for the... I've already forgotten what I'm going to say. I added a state for the route planning, but we'll come to that in a minute. Where am I drawing stuff? Graphics, there we go. So everything now that got rendered, this is rendering the space stations. The very last thing is it going to use the drawstring decal function. It's built into the Pixel game engine, and it draws the letter S. But in order to draw its scale invariant, I take the scale to world function of the transform view and just pass in some consistent coordinates. So this is going to be twice the normal font size when you draw in Pixel Game Engine. So each character in a Pixel Game Engine stuff is typically 8 by 8 pixels. So this will draw it in the screen at 16 by 16 pixels. That's why it's slightly larger than the text elsewhere on the screen. And I do exactly the same for the planets and the moon. So there it is for the moon. It just takes the the drawstring decal. I do a little offset. I need to make that smarter to put it somewhere in the middle. But what I'd really like is, instead of me drawing the letter, is me to draw a little pixely icon. And I just can't draw at all. Imagine when I add black holes to this. Well, I was thinking maybe we need to get Ericsson back in the chat, but you could have potentially sort of futuristic technology, super futuristic technology. I was thinking things like stargates, which allow you to do a point-to-point transportation at zero cost, but they have incredible amounts of power resources required. You know, so these really sort of late game kind of things. My imagination's been running away with where this can end up going. I just need to get a sleek and smooth way of interacting with everything up and running first. Stargates to link multiple star systems? Possibly. Godly. Jim Bim. First time you catch me live. Well, welcome. Welcome to the CodeZone. Hello. Stuff like space hooks, cyclers and such. You mean sort of using the planets to sort of move things around, have like non-straight logistics paths? I'm not making Kerbal Space Program. I'm not interested in doing that. Adding transport raw materials with mass drivers. Again, that sort of thing, it's great fun to think about, but for the player, do they really want to get bogged down in that kind of detail? And I don't. I wouldn't want to play a game that was so fiddly. But what I do think I want to add as well is the ability to... is cost. Now, that's one of the things we haven't looked at in this at all, is currency. How do we... I want to put something more interesting on the screen than a bit of code. How do we fund all of this universe, and how does it actually generate revenue in order to build things? It's quite important that the player has some sort of constraint in that they can't just build everything all at once. I also think building things should take time, rather than just sort of immediately appearing. There should be to build a new satellite should take some time. So maybe our satellite building tool is really just a blueprint editing tool. And it takes time to get the resources required to build the spaceship from wherever they need to come from. So as part of the logistics, you have to start engineering, getting the building equipment commodities to the location where it needs to be built. And that could have cost, because yes, they could be launched from other space stations, but perhaps we have to have craft that are launched from planet surfaces from time to time too. Particularly when we're talking about moons and things and planets where we want to mine the commodities that are actually on the planet. Now, getting stuff off a planet is expensive. So that has a risk-reward factor to it. We're going to have asteroids as well, so I do intend on having an asteroid belt in each solar system, or clusters and pockets of minerals to be resourced. In a way, I kind of want to have lots of hidden stuff in the solar system too, to encourage the player to actually go out and explore it. I was thinking about the idea of having the player be able to control at least one ship, which is kind of how we started all of this. And they could use that ship to just take part in the simulation, be just a regular ship that's there, but the player could go and drive it manually if they wanted to, and use that as a way of exploring the solar system at a very fine level. Now, very easy to hide things in our solar system, because we can see if we zoom into sort of the playable scales, which we're thinking are going to be like this, a tiny speck of some resource floating around in space that is going to be invisible. So it'd be a nice little bonus for the player to find it. And I quite like the idea of that. Just, you want some time to kill, your simulation's running fine, you just go on a bit of a scavenger hunt trying to hunt down the best resources. It's a bit like mining in Elite Dangerous. It has absolutely no purpose, it just fills in time. Pay them in exposure. Yeah, Alto, I think you're right. It's I mean, at the moment, these are all just ideas. They don't exist anywhere other than in my head. I probably should start getting a bit of a game design document down. I'll probably share these on with the Google Docs. I think it's if we're going to start making this a community thing, maybe start getting some of the assets drawn and a bit of a guideline on how to do all of that's required. Carbon is to build stuff for the ship. Yeah, so carbon could be a commodity. Now, it depends, where do we want to do sort of the refinement of things? So if we need like 3 titanium modules in order to make a particular space station module, do we go through the route of, well, we've got to go and mine some titanium dioxide, and then that's got to go and get processed somewhere in order, and that processing also requires power, and that, you know, there's elements to it like that. That we need to sort of work out the trees for. And we're going to need nerds, genuine nerds that know about sort of how things are made. You could build something like printers that has carbon-based toners to build 3D parts. Well, possibly. You know, that could be it. So we've got different space station modules. Later on, some of those modules could be they exist to create other space station modules. You know, one of the things we don't know yet is, how do we inventorize space station modules? Do we have this sort of solar system-wide collective of space station parts that the player is generating? Where are they stored, for example? They're not just stored anywhere. They've got to be stored somewhere. And perhaps if we need one, where does it get them from? Does the AI go to the nearest source of wherever they're stored? Do we have to have like warehouse space stations which act as temporary buffers? In Anno, if you have warehouses on the island, they're all like the Anno's internet. So if you put X commodities into warehouse 1, they're immediately available in all the other warehouses on the island. Now, that's a bit of a way to get around requiring sort of any complicated path planning and resource management. We've kind of done the same thing because we don't have any path planning at all. There's literally no collisions. Everything is point to point. Just the paths move about. How easy is it going to be to mod the logistics side of things? That's one of the things that we're probably not going to be easy to mod, simply because we might be able to mod the ships, we'll be able to mod the resources, we'll be able to mod the units, we'll be able to mod how the production chain works, we'll be able to mod the research trees, all of those things we'll be able to mod. But things like selecting a planet, we're not going to be easily going to mod that. The logistics, I think, are always going to be manually specified. So you will have to develop and build a ship of a certain size and type and capability of carrying the goods that you need it to carry, and then you can give that ship a route. And right now, we're visualizing a single stage of that route, but it doesn't need to be. It could be a circular route, and that's how I kind of want to go down that route. So once we've established the mechanics of how that happens, then I don't think that's going to be moddable. One of the things I will say is that I intend the space stations to have sort of a landing platform. So each space station will have to have a slot, as it were, where something can dock with it, and that docking process and exchange of goods takes time. But whilst something is docked there, I'd like to try and come up with a way of making other ships just simply go into a holding pattern and waiting until they've got availability. I think that'll be a nice episode, sort of working out the algorithms for that. Do we make factories on surfaces? I think we're going to have something on surfaces, simply because we're mining resources. So it's how do we go about representing that? I don't want to add another layer of building things. So I think what we should have is your mine becomes something that exists on the planet surface. We don't actually plot out the facilities on the planet surface. Perhaps you click on a planet and it comes up in the list, or in an icon way, what utilities are down there on that planet. And the cost in getting them off the planet is meant to be prohibitive. It's meant to make you think about how they get off there into the space station. Well, we did mention stationary objects before, which is, I think, actually having a stationary object is something you're going to have to pay a premium to have. Yeah, I want traffic jams. That's the point, right? We're going to have some way of absorbing traffic problems because all of the logistic routes change. The system won't ever reach a state of equilibrium where it's all perfectly balanced. Things are going to get congested and clogged up, and that's where I think the fun part of the gameplay comes in. Also, makes it very difficult to tune. Hey, Speedy. Turned up at last. Well, better late than never. It would be cool to have different technology trees. Well, I think we'll definitely have a technology tree. We'll obviously have to settle on one that the game is that defines the official game. I guess the whole game is described as a tree one way or another. So I think we've not got much coding time left after all this talking. So I think what we'll have a look at is fixing up the fairly abysmal route testing tool, because right now I've placed these two satellites. I want to join them up. So I select a satellite and I press this R key, and you can see literally nothing happens. I don't know what has happened here. So then I need to click on the other space station, and you saw very briefly it flashed, and now this space station has become selected. The route is there, but we don't see the route in Object is Selected mode. We only see it in idle mode. So it's all sort of bad, and maybe we can do a bit better. Is it possible to also... Yes, there we go. So we can also connect the routes to other objects. I think we can connect anything that is selectable, but I can't at the moment. I don't think I can. Yes, I can't plot from planet to planet, which is good because I don't want that. I think we've always got to go through a space station of some description. But I can connect space stations directly to planets, which is okay, I think, because we want to get stuff from the planet's surface to the main space station, potentially. Nothing stopping us having multiple connections to particular objects. But the way that we're drawing that right now, just to test, is a little bit rubbish. It's all over the place. Hang on, I've got a ping in the chat. Right now, thank you very much, Orzel, but right now I'm streaming. Will there be alternatives to shipping with, well, ships? Probably not. Only because I can't really think sensibly about what those alternatives are. I don't want to sort of go into the ridiculously futuristic teleportation systems and things are a little bit... Well, they'd just be game breaking, right? You'd end up in a situation where, obviously, if you don't balance it right, you're going to become so powerful that you'll just replace everything with teleportation, transportation systems, and then the game doesn't work, right? I don't know what the end game is either. Now, maybe that's a critical flaw in the plan. You build this simulation, but to what end? So I quite like the idea that you're not alone in the universe. Now, how that other faction is handled, it would be nice to think about doing it as a bit of an AI project, but it could also be a multiplayer project. So we need to also start thinking about how the user does genuinely interact with the scene. We've got this sort of hacked together manual way with state machines, but if later on we're going to kind of abstract that a little bit into having some other entity control the builds and that sort of thing, yeah, difficult to engineer in later on. Now, it's been a good episode, this one so far, because I kind of needed to have this discussion with you guys, but also with myself. It's been a useful one to think about what's missing. It's the most elaborate spirograph simulator you've ever seen. We did actually make a spirograph simulator on the server. Made it for Luby a couple of weeks ago because he wanted to draw pretty patterns. And then I got excited by Frank Force's demos on nanites, I think he actually called them, rather coincidentally. Do you have plans to work on this game post-release? If it ever gets released, I mean, it's always going to just be a bit of a hobby project. I don't know if it'll ever see the release beyond being put on GitHub. I don't know. I'd like to see it grow. Now, the only way I can see this grow sort of properly is by getting the graphics done well. My hacked together graphics are they're functional enough for us to test things, but they're actually, they're not good. And I think it needs a consistent art style as well. If we go for pixely one things and realistic the other, that might not always work. Choosing the right colours for things, it needs to be consistent. So the problem with a lot of indie games I've seen out there is that they just don't have consistency in their appearance, and that to me makes them look unpolished. And I actually quite like a game that's polished. What rendering API is used under the hood for this game? This is Pixel Game Engine. So it's the one I use for all of the videos on my YouTube channel. It's literally just allows you to plot pixels very nicely. And at good speed too. So if I take these circles off, we'll be rendering at just over 1,500 frames per second, but the circles are a bit slow. So if I zoom out a bit there, see the frame rate starts to shoot up. We also need to find some caps for this scaling as well, because we can scale out to the point where the parallax scrolling starts to look a bit ridiculous. Why can't we all get along? Why enemies? No, I think you're right, Dragonite. It doesn't have to be enemies, it's just other players. I guess that's the way to think about it. Anno does the same thing. It just has other entities that exist in the universe, but it doesn't necessarily call them enemies. You can go to war with them. Does that add another dynamic of things? Do we start worrying about diplomacy? I think that sort of thing I would put as a second tier concern for the time being. I think the next stages, certainly in the development of this project, is to start having the modules actually mean something. So even at the most basic level, and we will start with power because it's simple, we need to look at a way of, we have modules that generate something, and modules that generate things typically have inputs. Those inputs need to be consumed, they need to be processed, and they produce outputs. And those outputs need to be delivered to the things that require them as their inputs. So there's a natural progression of how we can get things to work here. We also need to think about storage and silos and that sort of thing in the space stations too, just because we need those natural buffers. It's going to take time for things to transport around this universe. But that is part of the fun of the game, trying to tinker with those delivery routes to be just perfect, and making sure you've got your space stations in precisely the right place. Tracking a craft following a route between planet space stations looks interesting, as the target is always moving. Yeah, I was just always going to make them take a straight line path. So it's, I'm not going to implement it. Sort of launches here, slingshots around the sun, and goes somewhere else. I'm not interested. Craft can go in front of the sun. This, of course, is a 3D universe, and nothing can collide with anything else. So if two craft happen to overlap, well, they've not crashed into each other. That takes out a lot of complexity that we just don't need to worry about. And one of the reasons I wanted to draw these lines was, well, what is the craft's path? What is it going to take? And we can see as things are moving around, we just constantly update the line. So the craft will find its way to where it needs to go eventually, as we'll just basically linear interpolate along its path. Not quite linearly interpolate, because we don't want it to take a constant amount of time to travel that section. It's just got to get to that destination. And the craft themselves also present an interesting opportunity for sort of tweaking and tinkering. They're going to have various cargo holds. They're going to have various additional features on them. They have different engine types. They might have to be refueled, that sort of thing. And building craft and maintaining craft, and craft have to have a running cost, which did make me think. We start thinking about workforce, but in reality, if we had this sort of framework, are we really going to have a pilot on the ships? Is that something that's ever going to really be in the future? If the ships are just going to transport goods from one place to another? I don't know. I quite like the idea of having a crew on the ships, but I don't think it really means anything. That's another one we can leave to some later point to discuss, I think. Yeah, you might if the ships are large or complicated enough. It could be, we've got this ability, and this is just I'm throwing this idea, making it up as we go along a little bit. We've got this ability to make these space stations. So if we take exactly the same technology, exactly the same implementation of stuff, we could potentially make it define ships where modules could be things like engines and like cargo base. So then does the ship itself just become the same as a space station, maybe on a smaller physical scale, but has to have its own set of modules and things in order to function properly? I worry about things like that because does it make the game too complicated? Maybe something we'll have to see, but I can't see a reason why we can't reuse all of the space station stuff in order to designing ships. And that way you can design your own ships and how they function, and maybe perform in battle. Hint, hint. Because I think that's necessary. I think we will have to have some disruptive force going on in the universe. The player has to be prepared for something. There has to be a reason why you're doing all of these things. You look forward to how ships will follow their path on a constantly moving universe. Well, hopefully it'll be slightly better than the camera. I mean, the camera copes with the fact that things are moving. You can see it moves in a straight line between the objects. So it's a similar idea, just on a much slower scale. Finally joining live, Clammore. Well, we've only got not long left, I'm afraid, so sorry about that. Inherit from a spacecraft class that contains the fundamental functions of both, and you can just add on extra functions to individual classes. It depends. Now, we've not yet, and I've not yet, thought about how we're actually realistically structuring the space stations. So at the moment, we know that they're a vector of IDs. If we want to have a look at the code for what is a space station. The space station right now is a vector of installed modules. And this gives us the ability, if we start making this object-oriented again, it becomes quite difficult later on to sort of utilize the composition effects of the entity component system that we've got. But the downside to the entity component system is you can't use it in such a way of creating components like solar panels. So it's no good for me to make the solar panel a component because I can only have one of each type of component attached to a particular entity. Instead, you've got to think of it a little bit differently. That the component is the collection of modules attached to the space station. So I can see a situation where in our space station, this is where we'll start putting the functional stuff to go and update the state of all of the modules for that particular space station. And by update the state, what that really means is tap into the external Lua file and call the appropriate functions for that module to do its processing of whatever set of input goods to output goods. Maybe the sun is dead and you need to harvest the energy somewhere else. Well, I do like the idea of having sort of dangerous energy sources, things like radiation. Because then you've got this problem of what do you do with all of this radiation. So we can make it current and we can have some sort of modern day attitudes towards how we present this information. It would be very tempting to just say, well, you just throw all of the radioactive waste into the center of the sun, but potentially you could use it as a game element. It's actually this bad thing that builds up and it starts killing people and it causes accidents. Maybe it's just if you've got too much radiation in one place, it starts causing problems for you. So I quite like the idea of having this anti-material that you have to. It's always being generated. It's a waste product of some description, but you can't just simply dump it into the sun. You need to actually logistically move it around in such a way that it doesn't damage your fleet and your space stations. Are there any plans of having routes adjust automatically? Let's say go to X station only if it's too much of a diversion from the path to Y. Probably not. Only because if you've got a limited cargo bay, There's literally no point in going to somewhere you've not got the goods to deliver. Now, we could have, and we probably will have to have some like very simple AI control these ships. Whether the player would want to allow them to make those sort of decisions on the player's behalf, I don't know. Certainly, Anno doesn't really allow you to do that. It has a very simplistic system for shifting goods around, and I think that simplicity is born out of you just wouldn't be able to make a supply chain in a functional way. If it was at certain stages making decisions for itself. It's an interesting one. Maybe it's worth experimenting with. If we go for energy sources, one fuel that is solid and gas, and solar that is light, another is fusion and fission energy, you think this covers everything? I quite like, yes, the idea of solar sails, for example. What if you wanted to get a huge amount of very heavy goods from one place to another? Right? You'd put them all onto a massive ship with a huge solar sail on it and just let it slowly drift across the satellite system. Perhaps this is an instance where the huge ships can have little ships that distribute from itself. We've got that kind of technology in our entity component system that we can have, the ships can have docking bays of their own. These kinds of decisions you probably want the shipping AI to make are maintaining supply thresholds, only shipping if a threshold. Yeah, that's why. Yeah, Anno. I think most of the Anno games have kept it that simple. Baby ships, exactly. I think this is the first CodeZone where we've done almost no code. In fact, we have done no code. So I just wanted to show part of the route plotting system. So this was just something I hacked in just to make these lines appear, and just so keep you guys up to date with where it is. I added a component which was a component called a route stage, and the route stage consisted of literally two IDs, two entities, which are the starting point and ending point, point 1 and 2. I also added then to the main state machine, I added an additional state, which was select destination, and that's what happens when we press the R key. So let's go and have a look at that state machine. So before you can plot a route, you have to have an object selected. So there's no point in doing any of this in idle view. Fortunately, we have a state called object is selected. So it's only here when you press the R key do we then want to move into the state, which allows us to select another thing, the destination of the route. So I kept this locked into space stations. So routes need to start at space stations. This could change. So this was hacking together to see what the lines look like. If we've currently got a space station selected, and then we press the R key, then I'm going to create a new route start link here. I've not created the entity yet and thrown it into the entity component system. I'm just storing that starting location. So the entity which is selectable will have an ID. That's the ID I'm storing. But then I move into another state, and it was this new state that graphically doesn't have any representation. That's why all the things disappear. Select destination. Let's go and have a look at the select destination state. So this uses the same, basically it's basically the same as the idle state. We can freely pan and zoom around, and we want to select an object. And if we select an object and we're in select destination, that's when I go and call the create route stage, and that adds the entity to the entity component system. And straight away I go back into object is selected state. So the idea is it looks and feels like normal idle and object selection state, but this time in between it'll create this route. One sketchy guy. Hi, Jared. Hello. For some reason, my Twitch chat sort of scrolls up and down. It must be when I come over to the screen and scroll the mouse wheel, it's still got the Twitch chat sort of highlighted briefly. Actually, endgame energy should be harvesting energy from black hole gravity. This is the problem when you let nerds free on game development. A remarkable prediction of Einstein's theory of general relativity. It looks like we've got an Ericsson competitor here in the chat. Lancemaker. Yes, good. I'm glad people that are joining the chat that actually know about this stuff. I mean, I like space, but I'm certainly not a space nerd by any means. But I do want to avoid going too much into sort of realistic physics if we can help it. Because let's be honest, not many people enjoy playing, well, physics simulations. Unless they're bad physics simulations. Goat Simulator was awesome. I enjoyed that tremendously. Got a couple of posts in the CodeZone. This is the chat on the Discord channel. You can post images and things, a bit more flexible than the Twitch chat. How's this for the style of the icons? It's a cookie. And Acronymus is making some notes on, sort of different transportation systems. I think I'm going to start collecting this and putting a game design document together, because lots of ideas have been thrown around tonight. In fact, I'm going to go re-watch this stream pretty much straight away and perhaps start jotting down some of the ideas, capturing them for future use. We've not done much coding today, but I think that's it. We've kind of hit the 1 hour mark. So I'm going to leave it there. So if you didn't know, I've released a video today. It's the first video I've released in about, I think, 6 weeks. It's been a while. I've had some time, done some one lone coder stuff. I've been on the Discord sort of all afternoon too. I gather 13 digits is a moon. It's a moon that looks like a cookie. Oh, he's going to hate me later on. We're having this constant tiff about graphics at the moment. Dragonite, thank you very much. Yeah, I'm going to certainly get some rest, I think. Now, some important news is, well, my life is likely to change next weekend. For those in the know, you'll know what that means. So, it could very well be that Tuesday is the last time you'll hear from me, probably for a couple of weeks. I'll keep you posted on that. So, until I see you next, I wish you all the best and take care. Good night.